Hello and welcome to Ukraine Today. I'm Rahim Rahimtullah. Ukraine finds itself at a difficult political moment. The economy minister, Aivaras, Abromavicius, has tendered his resignation. This threatens to push an already unstable country further into crisis. Moreover, it could undermine Western support for the reform program, which is ambitious and which Ukraine has embarked on in the past 2 years since the pro-EU Maidan revolution. So what's next for Ukraine? Well, helping us answer that question is my guest today, Canada's ambassador to Ukraine, Roman Waschuk. Ambassador Waschuk, many thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Your reaction, Abromavicius' resignation, came as something of a shock. Were you also surprised?
I think we learned about it as events were unfolding. You know, nobody can expect that a post-revolutionary situation will unfold in a calm, linear fashion. Well, maybe people who write project management reports, but in politics, that's not the way it works. So you have to expect bumps in the road, and crisis comes with transformation. Transformation comes with crisis. You
put your name on a letter alongside many other Western ambassadors expressing regret and disappointment at this resignation. Why did you do that?
I'll agree that it's a bit unusual, and you wouldn't expect sort of the ambassadors of Denmark, Poland, and Azerbaijan to write a letter about cabinet change in Canada or any other country.
True.
We did it because I think we saw it as being symptomatic of an expectations gap in Ukraine. Expectations and performance not meeting up. And those are the expectations primarily of Ukrainian society, but also of Western partners. And government is the art of the possible. It's that everywhere. It is in Ukraine too. There is, though, if you've set yourself, and you mentioned ambitious targets, for the whole governance system to act and strive towards those targets and not take old-fashioned, easy ways out.
But Abromavicius, he has stepped down. Isn't that, in a way, he's sort of letting the side down? I mean, he should have stayed the course. I mean, yes, he has spoken out about corruption. He's accused some very high-level people of some very shady dealings. It seems, I mean, is that really a good idea? Should he not have just waited it out? I mean, yes, this is Ukraine. He knew what he was getting himself into.
Well, I'm not here to second-guess anybody. I think the announcement was meant as a kind of a wake-up call for problems that persist, sort of in the back rooms of the system here. I was just reading this morning a survey about Ukrainian attitudes towards corruption. On the one hand, Ukrainians' personal experience is that it's down by about a third in terms of their personal lives. Their perception is that it's grown because there's much more coverage about it. But their tolerance for it is way down by 2/3. So there's, I would say overall, there's positive movement forward. And I think Minister Abromavicius, both in his statement and in conversations we've had, reminded us there's a lot that's been done. State enterprise losses are down 100 billion hryvnia from last year. The budget is much more balanced. There is actually less money seeping out of the system. But with very ambitious targets, you got to keep upping the game.
Yeah, I mean, and like you say, I mean, there has been a lot of progress, which in a way makes his resignation slightly strange as well, because we have seen some improvements. He's said since that he would like his resignation to be a cold shower for the government. Do you see it that way? Do you think it will be taken that way? Could something, I mean, in other words, could something positive actually come out of this?
As I say, crisis and transformation. I think the fact that there have been the consultations that happened yesterday, both the cabinet extraordinary meeting, meeting with ambassadors, shows that this is being taken very seriously, and that people are drawing conclusions that Ukraine's got to keep moving forward. As I say, not a road without bumps, but I'm pretty confident that this year will continue to be, as it has started, to be a year of economic recovery and growth.
And so you don't think Ukraine will be too far shunted off the path of reform that it's been on?
I think not. I think, in fact, this is a kind of a salutary reminder of what the targets are, and keep aiming at them.
And the stakes are very high.
Very much so. But this is a very resilient country. You know, authoritarian countries can seem very shiny, but can be brittle and topple over at the first signs of crisis. Ukraine, with its very vibrant civil society, people who have been through a lot and are able to cope, rolls with the punches, but keeps advancing. And so I'm optimistic about that.
Do you have any sense that in Ottawa, in Washington, in London, that this could undermine support for Ukraine?
I think people are watching carefully. I think they'll be satisfied and pleased to see that it's being taken very seriously, that there's broad public discussion, that the most senior leaders in the country are devoting time to analyzing this and figuring out what are the next policy steps they need to take to convince Ukrainians, first of all, and to also maintain the confidence of external partners. So I think it's early days, but I'm pretty confident that a forward-looking positive solution can be found.
Do you think the Ukrainian people will ultimately view this as a positive thing, in a sense that the fact that he has spoken out about corruption, that could move anti-corruption efforts forward? Do you think ultimately they will, I mean, they may regret his decision, but do you think perhaps long term they might look back and say, well, that was a turning point. We're actually very glad that he did that?
Possibly. I mean, too early to tell. One thing that has happened is that the case has been referred to the new National Anti-Corruption Bureau. So this will be one of the test cases for the new institutions that have just started their work. So we'll just have to keep watching.
And do you think Western governments actually support this investigation into corruption? I mean, in some ways, they want this to come out as well, do they not?
Well, I think Western partners have been supporting the formation of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, the agency, the Special Anti-Corruption Procuracy. But I think just as they need to be independent of branches of Ukrainian authorities, so these agencies also need to be independent of Western donors and partners. They're Ukrainian agencies. They're going to do their job, and it's hands off from the rest of us in terms of how they handle the cases.
Because there has been some who argue that, in fact, what the US wants, for example, what Canada might want, is that the status quo be maintained here in Ukraine. Actually, they wouldn't want to see anything happen here which would destabilize the situation. Making reforms which are too radical could bring the whole house of cards down. Do you see Abramovicius' resignation as something on those lines? In that sense, they'll be disappointed because this is a potentially destabilizing factor?
You know, I think people are realistic enough to assume that, again, in a post-revolutionary situation, you're not going to have a government that will remain perfectly identical in terms of personnel for years and years and years. I mean, it's a dynamic situation, so changes will happen.
Yes.
And as I say, Ukraine is not a house of cards. It doesn't tip over at the first available opportunity. It's more of a slinky, or it's more of a, it can take the punches and come right back at you.
Well, Mr. Waschuk, we have just a moment left. Finally, then, to sum up, I think your views are fairly clear. This, something of a blow, but Ukraine will recover. Absolutely.
It's part of essentially a learning and growing process for the political system and for the new institutions, anti-corruption institutions that have been created. And it's now up to both politicians and investigators to deal with it.
Well, Ambassador Waschuk, on that note, I'm afraid that is where we'll have to wrap it up because we are out of time. But I'd like to thank you very, very much for coming in to speak with us.
You're very welcome.
You've been watching Ukraine Today. I've been joined by Canada's ambassador to Ukraine, Roman Waschuk. That's all we have time for today. Do join us again next time.